Well, hey everybody, welcome back to the Bill and Ray Show. I'm out here making another marble today, and I'm going to do a version of my Pixie Tech, kind of a chaos pattern, and I'm going to do something a little different by using this Chinese yellow transparent glass as kind of my foundation. I don't think I've tried that before, but after last week's marble I used this with some fuming and I liked it. So that's what we're going to start with, is pulling out some of this glass into stringers. I know it's very mundane, but I've already pulled some stringers and cleaned up some different glass that I've got out. But I need a fair bit of pretty small gauge stringer. So normally when I've done this pattern, I just use clear glass to build my structure with. But using especially a really pale color, can give a whole different kind of color palette to your gold fuming. So this is the way I pull out stringers. I do it as kind of one continuous motion, heating the shoulder of the rod, trying to pull with some consistent tension. And when we get to the end, then we just kind of keep pulling a little bit until it firms up. The first one was pretty thin. We'll do another one just to be sure. Okay, well, that's all there is to that. This kind of transparent color is very fluid. Works very quickly, very easily. Clean this up. Alright, that's all we're going to do with that. We're going to move on to our main 19mm rod that I'm going to build off of. And we're going to turn on our Red Max torch and blow some carbon out of it, or whatever it's got in there. Use a brush, simple brush. Brush the face of your torch just like brushing your teeth every day, maybe twice a day, depending on how much torching you do. I've seen some pictures of people selling their used torches that just look pretty disastrous, and I think, man, did they ever take care of their torch? It's usually the most expensive thing on our bench. And you should keep it clean. The simplest first step to keep it clean is just brushing the face of it. Once you allow some material to start distorting your face, it kind of accelerates down to a deteriorating torch. I've never had to have one of my torches sent back to the factory to be cleaned or fixed or whatever, and I did do on my cheetah torch, GTT cheetah, I tightened the valves, and I really should do that for this lynx. It's very touchy. And it's not terribly hard to do. We just haven't taken the time to fiddle with it. It's pretty clean glass. So we need to build up a base, as often the case. This is just going to be a ball gather. But we need something to start with. Running into things over here. Trying to get an angle so it starts falling back and building up. Well, I hope everybody's doing well out there. Today is an unusual day, I guess, because it's going to hit 85 supposedly this afternoon. Early spring where we are, that's just ridiculous. And then we're going to go through the weekend. It's going to be cold and wet, so trying to get out here, get this glass project completed before it gets too warm. I have a window air conditioner I put in the shop eventually. Okay, we're kind of getting large enough size, and I'm going to focus back here on the transition zone and just get that kind of smoothed out. Okay, at this point we just need this base form to settle down. And I thought, just because I haven't used this a while, thought I'd add a little bling to this project. So I've got a little bit of this crushed opal. And I thought I'd just add a little bit in here to the core. Let's see that overheat there. Just add a little sparkle, hopefully. All right, who's up next? We're going to build our little open cage. And we need a kind of a sharp little quiet flame. We're going to get our starting points way out here on the fat end. Everything's running into each other here. Now trying to see the flame out in space is a little tricky for me. for my eyes. Once you found the heat, it gets hot in a hurry. Alright. I don't know why I do this pattern, but I started out doing it. I kind of like to keep doing it. Trying to keep things warm. Struggling with getting the right flame going on here. Okay, well that's getting a little crazy. It's going to get crazier. Okay, so we got our open cage structure. Warm this up a little bit. And we're going to see if we can apply some fume. Now, the one thing about spraying gold onto yellow glass is it's not as obvious how much fume you're throwing down. And because it's such an open structure, it kind of takes a little imagination to get gold to coat everything. Okay, now I'll throw some silver fume on top of that. Oops, I'm losing it here. Where did he come from? Throw that out somewhere. So now, I'm going to start letting this craziness fall apart, I guess. This is why these chaos patterns never turn out the same, because it is true chaos. So we start heating up the base rod and trying to get all that material to condense down. That was not the greatest example of doing this technique, I'll have you know. That got a little crazy. But that is part of the charm of it. You're never too sure how it's going to turn out. So this process is take some time with this step, because this will make a big determination on how that pattern looks. And you definitely don't want to use any tooling through this phase. I mean, maybe you could use a little poker tool. I have one handy. I guess I don't even have one over here. If you feel you need to kind of tease some stuff around, but try and let it settle in on its own and hopefully push air out. Now it's getting a little softer all around. I'm going to come back to a bit of an angle to let it kind of fall back. Now this, for some reason, wound up being kind of like almost a line across, sort of a two-sided thing. So this should work pretty well to give it a little twist action. Alright, let this solidify before we start manipulating it. Got one little spot that was still trying to expel some air, I think. Okay, next step. Turn this into a cone shape at this point. So we can try and work from our widest point forward. I'm trying to create a fixed wide end there, the wide diameter. I'm kind of pulling a little bit to kind of pull in that shoulder. And then we'll let this point kind of come out. So then we'll kind of build up some general heat base here so we can twist it a little bit. Okay. Well, that's pretty cool. So we're going to do some black frit now. And sometimes I want just kind of a sprinkle of black frit across the background. This allows the fuming effects to show up nicely. So kind of bring this angle so that the face of that cone shape is kind of flat to the flame. Build up some good heat. Run it through the frit until we have just kind of a nice loose coating. I didn't get a whole lot on the tip there. Okay, letting this frit melt in on its own without marvering until it gets most all the way stitched together, and then do a little gentle roll. Okay. Put away our frit. And then the background, we're going to do some blue spruce. So just drawing a spiral with just a little gap. Get this at least partially settled in on its own. Then we're going to try and squeeze this together. I'll leave some pretty skinny little gaps. And hopefully we'll see some texture to that from the inside, where it'll give some undulation to that frit layer. I didn't have any stringer pulled out from this blue spruce, so we're going to run this on the fly a little bit. Just pull some out and have a cool moment, break it loose. I'm going to come back in and fill these gaps. Okay. And get a little heat base built up here so we can manipulate this a little. All right, looking good. Alright, now we can start building up our clear on the mass buildup. And first I think actually I'm going to do some silver. If I can get that silver to come out. I'm not sure if it will. I don't know, it doesn't seem to be, not feeling it there. That's more like it. Okay, into the somewhat drawn-out process of building up some clear here. We'll start our first run away from that very tip. So just trying to stitch this clear down to the fume layer. So yeah, just kind of having a chill time out here, torching. Got through all the tricky stuff. Like I say, that cage wasn't the greatest. The stringers were a little on the thin side, so it went quickly way out of control. So these are all the different little aspects, even to a design I've done a lot of. I haven't done one for a while, but I am familiar with the process. And sometimes when things don't go according to what you thought they would, then you can sort of work with that, come up with something that's going to be kind of different. It's almost like I have this endless chase after one of the very first marbles I made with that pattern. Turned out really cool, I think. A lot of color. It's a really nice pattern. So it's sort of like I'm always still searching to match that first one I did, and I've never had one look quite like it. Okay, we get it all coated, the first layer, and I'm going to come back and squeeze in the edges, the ends. So we come back to the pointy end, and then we're going to kind of focus, almost like you're sharpening this end, staying away from the very tip. Come over to this other side. In this process, I'm kind of burning out some of the fume that spilled over onto the lens portion. You don't really want any fume out there. And I don't need much thickness right up at this edge. In fact, I don't want it to be thick right up there at that edge. It's a different look, but if you have it kind of a thick layer of clear there, you'll be able to see kind of around from the lens side, you'll kind of see around that edge. Okay, beat up this whole thing while it's at this stage. And let that heat base settle down so we're not too much out of control. And we can continue to go at this to fill out a rounded backside. Just the plain clear glass, you can have a bit more of a propane-rich flame. As I mentioned before, this stage here has quite an influence on how large the final marble is going to be. This is one of the main steps that you can kind of tweak how big a marble you want. You still come out with a cool marble whether you stop and make it a little bit smaller or pile it up, make it really big. And my stick of glass is getting very short here. Okay, we can melt this down and see where we're at. I think this is probably looking pretty good. Maybe we'll aim, I keep saying I'm going to aim for a little bit smaller marble. We'll see. I'll take this moment to thank our sponsor, Epicwater Filters. We've got a link in the description below if you're interested in having a home filtration system. They are an excellent product. We've got the pitcher that goes in the refrigerator. So anytime you want to grab a nice cold glass of clean water, it's right there. Okay, well this is an opportunity to get this clear glass completely melted in. You can see a few little tiny bubbles in this, but it's pretty inconsequential and won't really be very visible in the finished piece. But this pointed end is kind of an important part of this, so we're letting this heat up. As I say, I left that very tip exposed. You want that clear glass to condense around it. So this is kind of happening in a couple of different steps. First is to get clear to move. As I kind of applied it inconsistently right there in that end, but it should resolve itself. So one fun thing about glass, it will flow. It will go to where it wants to because of its surface tension effect, basically. Okay, we get out here towards getting this tip surrounded. Then we're going to angle it up, kind of go right in the flame, and now there's a bunch of glass kind of pulling that end out. The clear glass being the most fluid part of the process. And it doesn't want to flow over that colored glass on the end, but it has pulled it out. So that's cool, but that's not exactly what we want for the next step. So now we kind of go back the other direction. And heat up the wider end and try and kind of draw this together. So it's kind of a process of controlling where the heat is and where your angles are, how you let gravity pull. So you're rotating, always kind of counteracting gravity's wanting to droop it. But you can also go back and forth by angling things up or down. And also at this phase, it kind of works towards starting to build up the lens. The more you have a good mass of glass starting on the lens side, the more stable things are in this next process of drawing lines and raking. So we get all the way out here and start letting that feedstock kind of run into the lens. So a lot of motions and things happening are kind of slow. It kind of happens in slow motion with the torch. And sometimes if things seem too chaotic, you need to get out of the fire, let things settle down until you've got control over it, and reintroduce. That can really add a lot of time, but sometimes it's kind of necessary to keep things under control. So this is kind of like the initial gather that I started with. You get a heated end here on the end of the rod, and it will have a tendency to want to ball up. And by angling it, we can kind of add material to that lens side of things. But it will quickly get a little out of control. So we'll stop there and see if we can get this to settle down. All right, well, things are warming up. We're going to start drawing our color lines on the back, starting with Silver Strike 5. And right across that messy edge. Not here towards the end, and then we'll try and end on the focal point there. All right, I think this next one is deep blue. been using this a couple times recently. I get kind of enamored sometimes with colors that I haven't used in a while, or maybe not in the same application. And if it works well, then I want to keep trying it. Because there's quite a few colors that I've tried doing this step with that don't work well at all. So unfortunately, a lot of people think you just use whatever color you want for whatever function or purpose, and it really is not that simple. Alright, the other one I haven't used for a little bit is Rootbeer. Alright, we got our colors on. Moving along here. I did get a little off center, so in this portion of the program we'll get this hot enough and then try and settle out our orientation on center. I got the pointy end pushed into the flame here, and that lower third, let it condense in if it wants to. Now we really need to let this settle down for a minute. So I have a tendency of rushing into the next raking stage, and it gets way off center. Once that happens, it's just adds frustration to it. Hopefully that doesn't screw up the audio too much. I turned up the fan a little bit. I like to have a fan with a lot of capacity and then put it on a speed controller so it doesn't have to run full on. Alright, I think we're settled down. Heat up our pick. Oh, nice. I'm trying to fiddle with the torch flame and I don't have it quite right. Try and do this at a mesmerizingly slow pace with the flame kind of running ahead. So we're kind of heating just one little spot of glass. The core heat base is kind of losing it, so it takes a lot of heat to get that surface up to a flow stage. I'm struggling to get the right angle here. I guess we're done there. Just going to make one little loop there, but I don't think we need to do that. Okay, now if we're on center, which we appear to be, makes that a little bit easier. And I like to come along this pointed end and kind of squeeze it upwards towards the middle. And I'll kind of search around, see if there's anything that needs addressing, looking for any little tears or pinholes, bubbles. Good, good, good. Now the heat cycle to build up that heat. Got that cord, or the cord doesn't have to move much, but a good thickness does. So many of these steps, the end result will be better the more you just let the glass do what the glass wants to do. Don't fuss with it. There's a tendency to fiddle around, and certain things can perhaps accelerate things along. As I can start to see the inner part, I can sharpen this until I can sharpen this a little bit more. So, I just told you, don't do that. But if you see something that you think will help, don't be afraid to use tools, but use them gently and minimal. Alright, well, that's pretty settled down. I just need enough control here to get a punty onto it. This stuff, I don't really need it to cool off much. We can start working on building up the front lens. Start with some focused heat right on that little narrow crease. There's a fair bit of haze on the surface of this clear. And it's kind of a combination. So some of that is from the gold and silver fuming that kind of spills over. And some of that is from the colors. Colored glass, when it gets hot, will also be kind of dumping out some fumes. That's why colors can affect one another when they're next to each other. Well, sometimes there's a contact thing that happens that isn't really a result of fuming, but the colors are created by minerals. Those minerals can vaporize when they're really hot, and then they spread around. So kind of letting that really build up at that transition between the colored side and the clear side. So it basically has to expand to the correct diameter. And a little extra because I'm going to tear some off. See if I can do this on the fly. Yeah, a little hard to adjust the torch on the fly when I'm trying to work with both hands. Yeah, I keep thinking I'm going to make the marble it's a little bit smaller, but it doesn't seem to be happening. Out here to the roller. Come back to the fire and do another reheat, focusing on the marble side. I'm putting a lot of pressure from my left hand and letting the right hand just guide that punty. Then we come back into that narrow spot, heat it up, pull it out a touch. You don't make a bunch of big stringers. Okay, then I'm going to come along this edge, clean it up. If I leave the tweezers in the water until right before I need them, they work a lot better at releasing the glass. And if I hold them up near the torch and they dry off and warm up, they stick to the glass pretty good. So two factors. One is the temperature of the metal on the tweezers, and the other is just the fact that water will kind of make a little steam barrier. Okay, so we're coming back around to the beginning. And pull out a tail and gently tuck that in so we don't boil up that end. And I'll keep peeling off this outer layer. Got various impurities going on. And just different chemistry. Glass in the flame is changing chemistry on the surface. The longer it's in the fire. Okay, change angles here a little bit. So instead of gouging straight on with the tweezers, you're kind of going at it, laying it down kind of flat the surface when you're doing this. Stripping. Almost there. Alright, it's looking pretty good. Round to face the torch. Uncover a 3-inch mold, or 2.5-inch mold, I guess this is. A little bright spot there. I think that torch flew down a chunk. Alright, now we just got to get this thing round. It's pretty elongated at this point. As long as we can, we'll do some fast rotations to try and bring that in a bit and open up the circumference, if you will. But in that process, we start getting, well, from tearing the glass on the edge, we have kind of a fluted surface, so we're going to go into our angle marver of smooth out that edge. And then also, if you can, do slow rotations if your puntee is solid. I'll go in and hit the edge of that in this marble mold. Come into our smaller marble mold. That gives us quite a bit of shaping. Alright, time for a puntee transfer. I'll let that settle down for a second. When I cut this off, I'm going to kind of hold it vertical. It doesn't get too droopy. Keep rotating all the way through that transition. And draw out this point here. Flatten that in just a touch. Let it drift a little minute there, so we kind of warm up the whole thing until our puntee is a little bit soft. Get back on center. Anytime your puntee is kind of dorky, just try and get a little heat on it to where it softens and starts moving. And then as you rotate, you do the standard pause or lopsided rotation. Get it to fall into place. Literally fall into place. Unfortunately, the color side takes a lot longer to coerce into shaping up. So step one is trying to get some heat base in the core. If I can get it to stay on center pretty well, I can use some fast rotations to try and start moving that material. And then use our oversized marble mold before we transition to the 2-inch mold. We made this marble so big, I have got to do something. I'm going to have to start out with a smaller rod to begin with. keep thinking I'm doing pretty much the same thing, but they get bigger. Not the worst problem to have, but I'm missing one step in my marble mold assortment is a 2 1/4 inch. That would be handy to have about now. So try and do the same, drop in here and get sort of started. Oops. Should have turned off the flame in between there, not once I needed it. A good time to check to make sure the kiln is up to temperature. Once in a while I forget to turn on the kiln. When I get nearly done with the marble, then I have to sit and fiddle around with it in the flame for 15 minutes or something, waiting for the kiln to get up to speed. It takes a good 20 minutes, I guess, from room temperature up to 900. This is where you call the engine room and try and get some more power. Trying to work at warp speed here, and I'm not getting there fast enough. For this end phase, you know, you get a little antsy just to be done with it because it's all done, just getting it to finalize the shape. And a lot of times people ask, you know, how do you get it so round? And it's like, oh, this is how you do it. But you know, the reality is shaping is the easy part, at least from a technical standpoint. There's not much going on here, just trying to get the glass to conform. So my initial cone shape, I went kind of long, and I should have been shorter and stubbier, and then the construction from that point forward would have been a little easier. So one little change in the early stages will make a big change in the end result. And I kind of wish I had had that cone at that point a little shorter and stubbier, you know, wider at the right end. I'm using probably more pressure than I should there into that marble mold in terms of you don't want to break your punny rod. So by holding it practically vertical, I'm allowing things to kind of ease. So you keep kind of squeezing it together, then you try and relieve some of that pressure, tension. So there's a little bit of a squeeze back and forth happening. And then start looking at the reflections. And then there's other problems like bubbles that we're going to have to address. So when you break loose a bubble, now you've got a little boo-boo there that you need to, first of all, keep that one spot and let it fill in. But now we have one more anomaly in our edge that we're trying to work on. And again, we got off center, so we're trying to warm everything up and get back onto a good rotation. And the heat is kind of uneven. We have to try and work with that. So any little blemish like that you have to try and address. It adds some time to the process. That said, at this point we're working just on the outer layer. The core isn't going anywhere. Actually, don't want it to go anywhere. Wow, that opal is just magical stuff. Got some nice little color sparkles in there, along with our crazy chaos. This should be a pretty sweet marble. So we're going to just treat this as a plain polish session and stop using the marble mold tool and give this a minute to settle in. Okay, try and visualize the point here. Okay, then we want to kind of dig out, make sure we remove any traces of this honey connection. Trying to be really gentle at this point with it. You don't want it coming loose off this punty. Another little hot spot speckle. Okay, build up some heat here and step aside. Come in on this backside that's solid. One more time here. I'm going to kind of lose some heat. So we're done with the marble mold. Now we just need to flame polish. So every time you hit the tooling, the glass will leave some tool marks. So this is kind of a tricky judgment call because you don't really want to get too much heat going or you'll start distorting the surface or making it less perfect, less round. So I like to kind of do this in 2 stages. Okay, last call. Make sure to get that very front face where you're looking straight into it. You want that to be nice and smooth. Okay. Not done. Need to get this to cool down so we don't leave any marks in it when we put it in the marble mold. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Alright, so even so, I'll be gentle about putting it in here to the marble mold. And we'll do just a little flame polish here. Look at some reflections. It seems to be pretty good. And there we go, man. Another cool marble. Thank you so much, anybody who's hanging out watching these videos, if you're here still, or if you skipped ahead and found us here. In just a second, you get to see the finished marble in the video. But I won't get to see it till tomorrow, but I'm sure it's pretty cool. Put this guy into the kiln. We got another one done. So thank you guys for hanging out with me. Enjoy your day. Enjoy your friends and family. Take care of yourselves. And take care of those around you, and just be kind. If we all be kind, we'll have a great world. Thank you so much. See you again on another adventure, another time. Check it out.